Welcome to the Cowboy Office Show, where you'll experience expert analysis and epic discussion on key pillars of the equine industry, including sports, business, hobby, and the horse lifestyle. Your co-hosts are Jody Brainerd and Brian Dykert, industry veterans with over 120 years combined living the cowboy lifestyle. The Cowboy Office Show will help you get involved, ask more questions, and create change. We'll keep riding for you as together we learn from the ride already ridden, learn to listen better to our horse, and make our industry better for all. Each weekly episode will take a ride around the industry in less time than you can load the truck and trailer. Drop your email at cowboyoffice.com to receive weekly updates and never miss an episode. Saddle up as we ride into today's show.
Hello, Horse World. We're going to take a look at some stats from last year and the first half of this year. We know the second half of the year will produce even more dynamic stats and info as the bulk of the aged events are in the late summer and earlier fall. This show is all about where we are and where we might be headed. It's a new frontier. Welcome to the Cowboy Office. I'm Brian.
And I'm Jody. Welcome. We've got some 4-year-olds are competing as a group versus the 4 to 7-year-olds and more. We've got some great stuff to discuss, great data points, issues to think about. First, and as much as this is Memorial Day, we'd like to give a great big thanks to all our service members, past and present, those that gave their lives to offer us the lifestyle that we have in the United States today. We thank you. And those of our servicemen and women that are currently serving today, Cowboy Office, thanks you. And we as Americans, thank you for your sacrifice.
Well said.
Indeed. Thank you for the tribute, Jody. My name is Chelsea. I'm going to be the moderator for the episode. I'm also the voice of 100X and was at the Cowtown Classic, as well as will be with them for their upcoming shows. So really excited to not only be here for this podcast, but to talk a little bit about what last year's stats did in comparison to this year's 100X. I also have the newest member of the Sutton clan with me. So thank you guys for letting Shiloh join us this afternoon too.
Welcome to all of you, and congratulations and congratulations to 100X. Thank you.
Yeah, and Shiloh, guess you've heard me say you can't swim outside the gene pool. You know what that girl is going to be doing when she grows up. All right. Yeah, I remember that show I did, Mama. Yeah.
She definitely is a babbler, and everyone's like, plant corn, get corn. I'm like, yeah.
You got it.
She comes by naturally. Brian, you have put together some statistics. You guys have done many podcasts, and for those of you guys who have been with the Cowboy Office podcast for some time, have heard Brian and Jody talk about some of the statistics throughout the other aged events they've covered. But you guys have compiled last year's annual statistics, and I would love for you to show that graph as sort of a comparison for where the industry was at last year and then compare that forward. While Brian pulls that up, and we'll talk that through. If you guys are new to the episode, be sure to visit cowboyoffice.com. You can drop your email in there. You will be the first to receive not only these episodes when they get released, but to hear about all of the other news and analysis that the Cowboy Office is doing and paying attention to, even outside of the reining industry. You can have the opportunity to ask questions on this show, and much of the content that we'll talk about comes from the viewers' questions. So really excited for you guys to participate. Ryan, take it away.
Yep. Well, we've got it up. And so these are 2023 open aged events in the discipline of reining. So first disclosure is these are our stats. They're nobody else's. These are compiled by the Cowboy Office. Me and Jody, we're representing 13 open events crossed 2023, and only the open aged events. The other thing that's important here is knowing that these are all 5-judged events. So they represent 13 events. They were judged by 60 different officials and have 2,679 entries across all of them. There are some key pieces I'll just bring to note. 88.7% of all maneuvers marked in this sample were between -half and +half. That's not new news. It was that way, 15 and 20 years ago when the system was created. The new news is the use of the scale itself. And so in the bottom left of this chart is the entire scale, which goes from +1.5 down to -1.5. And +1.5 is used more than -1.5. Isn't that a good thing? Which just tells us the quality of the sport's moving in the right direction. But how much we're using that scale is still, we're still in a very conservative space. I think there's two interesting pieces on penalty applications. And the big one is 9.5% of runs, 9.5% of the runs that we have in this data point have non-unanimous penalties applied to them. That's rather significant. So just shy of 10%, and 10% of 2,600 is 260. So, rough number speaking, 206 runs at the open age events are getting penalties applied that are not unanimous by all officials. And the big one, this one always is a burr in Jody's saddle, is the crossing zero, and mine too, and I agree. 21% of all these runs have maneuver applications that cross zero, meaning that they have a minus half and a plus half applied at the same time. So that again it's a significant number, and it just displays some of the diversities in the work that we got to do in the sport. That's all.
Jody, I have questions, but before I do, is there anything here that you want to highlight numerically before I pose that?
No, I think we're really good. There's some things in the past that we've talked about. That crossing zero stat is huge. I've brought this up in the past. I'll just touch on it again for some people that maybe haven't had a chance to watch an episode where we covered that base before. But that crossing zero, that is a number that has increased, since my term as chair. And I don't have the answer to that. Would like to know why that is happening. In other words, why more officials are seeing individual maneuvers. I mean, the chair positions have been exactly the same, and 5-judge systems for the duration. So my question is, why is that number going up instead of being in that single percent? Why is that now in the mid 20 percentile? So anyway, that's a big thought that I have, and that's a question that I think we could ask.
I think it's a really interesting question. I do not have this as fact. This is only a thought. And my first reflex to answer that is the fact that we have more aged events than we've had in the past. That's one, which having more events that are 5-judge systems, we're having more diverse views, more judges. So it's a volume function would be my first reflex. And then comes the rest of it, because, like anything else, the more you do something, the better you get at it. Do we have too many judges not judging enough times? I'm not picking a side on all of that, but those are interesting pieces as we look into key data points and how can we make it better for everybody. That's all.
I'm curious, quick, before we move on from this graph, if you are an exhibitor or an owner and you've got an aged event horse, if you look at that bottom left-hand side, Brian, that shows this is how many, so 1.5s plus 1.5s are getting awarded 0.6%, minus 1.5s are getting awarded 0.1%, and then you can see everything in the middle. If you're competing and you're out there at some shows, would you say this is something that an exhibitor or owner can compare against to know where they sit in the industry? If they're seeing plus halves and plus ones on their scorecard, maybe we can go play at the big events. Or is that going to be absolutely relative to the specific market that they're in, or maybe the specific show that they're at?
I can't answer that without having a full analysis across the entire industry, across all exhibitors. You'd have to do that analysis. Is it relative? The answer would be yes. It's also relative because what we also know is the scale moves, and it moves per day, per event, per week, per month, per year. And it's moving by the exhibitors as well as the officials making the decisions. Those are all true facts. An exhibitor analyzing their own scorecard, what this represents, and is it relative to them because this represents the top of the sport? The answer would be yes. So if they're pulling plus ones and or plus 1.5s, is it relative to this? And is that basically hard to do? The answer is yes. And so that should mean something to them as they make decisions for the next event. Nope.
Right. Yeah. And I think, Brian, you said when that score floats, and I get the fact that we get the fact, because we've done this for 40 years, that when we say that scale we say that scale adjusts and it changes. And I've always felt like, even in my time as chair, that a good official, and we've talked about this many, many times, but we can find excellence at whatever level that you're at. And I think that a good official that's judging a green class can find good in a green class. And that good may not be the same good as that's in the Derby finals. But I think that a professional baseball umpire would adjust his strike zone if he were doing the Little League World Series. I mean, I would expect a good umpire to do that, to say, hey, look, this, I don't expect this kid to be pitching calling to the major leagues. He's 10 years old. So my strike zone's going to adjust. And I think that an official can do the same thing in our sport. Does that make sense?
And yeah,
Okay.
and it does. And I think as an industry, we've got to teach ourselves excellent in the green and the rookie is not the same as excellent in the open finals. Bottom line.
Exactly.
And if we all got comfortable with that, then that relative function keeps us all moving forward.
That's great context. I appreciate that. And I have heard you guys say in other instances, it's not about any one scorecard at any one moment, but looking at multiple scorecards. So if you've got 3 judges in the chair or 5 or across multiple events, which I think also does bring a lot of context to that. So yeah, makes sense. Looking at the age of horses, I think is really cool in comparing the graph that we just looked at aged events in general. So Futurity, Derby, which was, 4 to 7-year-olds. The 100X stakes was all about the 4-year-olds. And in comparison to the 4 to 7-year-olds or even 3 to 7-year-olds that we see at the Futurity, that those analytics would have covered last year. I know we've got a graph that looks at that, particularly against the NRBC, this year's NRBC, 2024 NRBC, against the 100X Cowtown Classic Stakes, which happened just a few weeks ago. So Brian, I'll let you talk through a few bullet points here, but I think it's fascinating, especially considering, Brian Bell, who won the 100X Stakes, which was also last year's Futurity winner, but winning on a 4-year-old, and what he talked about in terms of his strategy of using a 4-year-old. So I'll let you talk us through the graph, Brian.
Yes. Well, what we did was just because this was immediate. So what do we have to compare in today's time? And the mere fact 100X last year brought the first 4-year-old standalone event to the industry. That's true, which was Tulsa last August. Now it's in Fort Worth in May. But that's the first time 4-year-olds have been a standalone. That's a big deal, and that's a big move for the industry. And I think it's phenomenal because we're truly growing, because we've got the volume and the depth and the quality and all the ingredients for high quality competition to be able to do this. We used to always worry about life after the Futurity, and there was basically 2 Futurities, the Congress and the NRHA. Now there's a dozen Futurities. And so the 4-year-olds are in that place right now. So what we did was look at, since the NRBC is a 4 to 7-year-old, so that allowed all of those. And the 7-year-old was a relatively new conversation in the industry not too long ago that we allowed 7-year-olds in. I happen to be one of those that thought it was a bad idea. I was wrong. So it's okay. I like it when I'm wrong. So I try to use data and facts to prove my thoughts wrong, but that's fine. So what this does is look at the age. So of course at the bottom is the 100X Stakes. It was 100% 4-year-old, so they had 113 horses. But when you look at the NRBC and they had 250 horses this year, entries, this is the age of the horses breakdown in the NRBC this year, less than 6 weeks ago. 9.5% were 4-year-olds. So what the rest of it, you got 90% of those horses are 5 to 7-year-olds. That's true. Where's the bulk of them? 5-year-olds. And then the other half is split between 6 and 7. And I thought it was interesting because Brian Bell's post-winning run at the 100X, he talked about specifically how hard it was for him to hold that mare back, Crystallized Whiskey, for the 100X, knowing that was in her best interest to compete against 4-year-old. He was concerned about those 5 to 7-year-olds. And I thought it was a very interesting piece. And that's what provoked, well, let's look at that now that the industry's in this place. And I expect this to continue. Will we see more of them? Which is different than having the NRHA Derby is going to happen in Oklahoma City. And yes, if you got a 4-year-old, you can pay an additional fee and have a eligibility for an additional purse, but it's still running inside a mixed aged event. I think this is very different.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. Having shown lots of 4-year-olds and having shown lots of 5 and 6-year-old horses, by the time they were 7, they were always sold or in some non-pro riders' hands, or maybe even retired. But there's a huge difference between 4-year-olds, and there's probably an even bigger difference. Well, we know for a fact, and this, I don't want to get too far off target here, but there's a big difference between the mares and the studs.
Yeah.
So, I know that we had our past 2 futurity winners were both fillies, and that's freak, right? But both really, really good mares and ridden by really, really good horsemen. But I asked a question of myself because Brian, he said it was very, very difficult, but he scripted that mare's her show career, and he's done a great job, and I think he will continue to do so. But and Sean, and this is, like I said, this is not an opinion, this is a question. I asked myself because Sean, he's a hardworking guy, and he expects his horses to work as hard as he does. And she got shown in the major. She came back and like Sean just said, "Come on, you won the futurity, we're going again." And I wonder, I called it a mulligan, and, Brian, we had a little conversation about this. You talked a crystal ball. If he could look back, or if he had the crystal ball, at the beginning of that mare's 4-year-old year, kind of seen what was going to happen her, 4 or 5-year-old year, would he have held her back and scripted that mare's career like Brian has with this one? Or would he just go, yeah, we're going? You know what I mean? I wonder, because there's now so much money available, and I think, I love the 4-year-old deal. We've talked about it for years, and I think that it could have come a long time ago. But I think it's a wonderful event. It's great for the horses, and I think if people realize that they save those things for 4-year-olds, they'll be better as 5, 6, and 7-year-olds. Anyway, that was just a question I had, because there was 2 mares, and one was shown a lot, and this other one, she specifically waited for a 4-year-old event. So I would, if I see Sean at the Derby, maybe I can ask him that question. You know what I mean? You good answer for him. So
yeah, and I hear you, and I think it's a phenomenal question. Let me give you a couple numbers real quick. This is from the 100X, which was a 4-year-old only event. But when you look at the gender, because in the 113 entries that went through the go round, they're pretty close. You had 53 studs, 42 mares, and 18 geldings. So pretty close, mares and bring up the mare question. I think it's phenomenal, which is like the Kentucky Oaks in the thoroughbreds. But what's really interesting, now remember that 53 studs, 42 mares, okay? And when you go to the finals in the 100X, now this is level 4. So they take 25 horses to the finals, and you had 4 different sets of finals. Okay, fine. But here comes. In the level 4 finals, you had 17 studs and 4 mares and 4 geldings. So that now, when you look at level 1 through 3 finals, all 3 of the lower level finals, the number flips. There was 27 mares and 12 studs and 7 geldings. I just think you bring a point up that is absolutely it's a great question. And so it's going to be interesting to see where we all go.
Well, and I think that you talked about the Kentucky Oaks. That's a question that I've asked myself too, and I wouldn't put it to the viewers also. But is it time that we have a Kentucky Oaks available? In other words, that Derby is open to, you can run a filly in the Kentucky Derby if you want to, but most people are like, can't get one qualified, and or if they do, she gets outrun by the studs because they're just hard for the fillies to keep up. But that Kentucky Oaks, a fillies only race, it wouldn't change numbers one bit, but would it be, someone like Carter in 100X, she's so progressive. If she said, let's have a fillies only class here, and you get to enter this one, or you can enter the big one if you want to. But I think if there's enough money I actually think you would see numbers increase because there's some guys that would have fillies at home and say, you know what, she can't run with these studs. We're not going to bring her. But if there was
Right.
a filly class available, they might say, you know what? Yeah, she can come. So, that's another spot that wouldn't affect the entries, but it certainly could allow some mares to play in the game that wouldn't have to beat those 17 stud horses, right?
Yep. Yeah,
I
without a doubt. I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, I do too. And just as somebody who's obviously in the announcer chair and looking at those data points as they come through, and I didn't add them up, but I knew there was a disparity between how many were in the go round and how many were in the finals. So those numbers are super interesting. And I can't tell you statistically, maybe you guys have analyzed this or maybe it's something to look at moving forward. But as you mentioned, Dad, when you were initially bringing this point up, we do see 4-year-old programs in the industry. I mean, I know that Amanda Brumley had one some time ago and sort of pioneered that, and there's a few baked into the Derby and that kind of stuff. But even thinking back to the 2023 statistics regarding non-unanimous penalties, when you think about the fact that 10% of runs in these aged events have non-unanimous penalties, and you know for sure that that's showing up in, for example, a finals, 10% is a lot. And I know that the judges never are thinking they had a penalty, I'm done judging. However, I do know that they're concerned about getting the placings right. So I do wonder if when you have something like that where you've got a bigger class and there's some mares that are trying to make a run for it but are lower down in the pack, like the levels 1 through 3, I do question how, are they getting the payouts or the prominence maybe that they would if they were in a mare only class? It's a good
Yeah,
question.
All right.
I agree. Yep.
Totally agree. Yeah.
It'll be interesting. So we'll do the best we can to keep a track of those things. Going to be interesting to see how the industry continues to react to itself and how do we continue to develop. So
And there's obviously, I mean, the numbers from this year's 100X Cowtown Classic Stakes proves that there's plenty of 4-year-olds in the industry that, I mean, I don't think it affected NRBC's numbers at all, knowing that
no,
Cowtown was coming a
no.
few weeks later. They still had a great show, it seemed. So
Yeah, and
there's
they had
space.
more entries than they had the year before. So, and I don't know, I'd have to go back and look at last year and the age to the NRBC last year versus this year to see where that is. I just thought it was interesting. And I heard Brian's interview after that run, and he specifically was talking about that mental game plan and the decisions over the last 4 or 5 months. And so, and we now know, what's the difference between a 3-year-old in November and a 4-year-old in April or May? 5 months. I mean, that's it. That's the answer. That's a whole lot different than 18 and 24 months to the 5 and 6-year-olds.
Yeah. I know that we're not spending a ton of time, and we're going to talk about it a little later in the show, the slide contest that happened at the 100X. Did you happen to look at the gender of the slide contest?
I don't remember. I'd have to pull this stuff up. I do have the data. We are going to get to that in a minute.
He went on fourth.
Well,
I can tell you, female won it. So
Yeah,
they
she
whooped
did.
them. There was 31 of them. Miriam Stillo won it, and we
Yeah.
actually have her run. So we'll get to that one.
Okay.
Let's take a minute. I want to talk about, stick on the aged events and the stats a little bit on a larger size, because what I did was a probability factor. And this chart shows the probability of making either a set of finals or a purse payout, because not every aged event has a finals. So we looked at those two things the same, either making a finals or an aged event makes the purse payout. And this is of this year, 2024. So from the Cactus Classic in March till the 100X Stakes just a week ago in Fort Worth, and the 4 levels. And so this shows the entries in each of those. And then on the right-hand side, it actually shows you the probability of either making the finals or making the purse payout, depending on how those. The good news is all of those are 5-judge systems. So again, we're trying to look at things, in a comparable, even state. So it's very fascinating. I don't think it's overwhelmingly like New News, the Run for the Million is the hardest thing to get qualified. You got 16 horses to go. 6 of them are from last year, but 10 of them are getting qualified. And, that 88 to 90, that's what we've seen the last 2 or 3 years that have shown up to try and get qualified for those 10 spots. Very tough, very good. That's the most difficult. The NRBC level 4 is the second most difficult. I think when you start to come down. So this was just an informational piece. I just thought it was interesting. We thought it was interesting.
I think this is gold. To me, if you are anyone that is showing or making a decision about showing this, you'd have to do a little bit more homework in terms of what's the cost of the entry fee and the town that you're showing and the rest of it. But this gives you facts on show strategy. And we now have so many shows in the industry that you can start to make decisions. I nerd out over this kind of stuff. Jody, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I would ask you, you don't have to have this compiled for me, Brian, but I would, you've heard me talk about the 80-20 rule before, where, 80% of the money is won by 20% of the ride. And in that, do these stats hold true to that? It would be something that would be interesting to look at,
And I hear you, and I know your 80-20 rule, and I agree with it. And it was that way our lifetime. And the good news is, now that you bring that point up, will we start to track that through 2024 and then look at it so that we can see that pool that are in the purse payout, and we'll see what that looks like. So
Okay.
I think that's it, and we'll do it. So by the end of the year, we'll have a second series to this and then come back with that. So 80-20, I'm writing that down.
It's our numbers monster again, Chelsea, right? It's just like, hooray, I get to do this.
No, I love it. I love
Yeah,
it.
I do too.
And what you're talking about is the philosophy that 80% of the money goes to 20% of the exhibitor pool, right? 80% of the
Correct.
purse
Yes.
money. Yeah, would be very interesting, especially now that you're seeing classes like, at the Cowtown Classic, at the Cowtown Stakes, that level 1 paid everyone that didn't score 0. Now it may not have paid back their entry fee. I didn't do the math on it, but we're starting to see shows that don't just have high purse payout at the top, but are paying all the way down. They paid all finalists from all levels. That's a cool deal. So to see if that's affecting that 80-20 would be cool.
Yeah, and we will, and we can, because those results, and so we can track that money and who's getting it. And so, but I don't remember the specifics, but level 2 and level 3 in the 100X stakes paid very well. So yes, and I'm not telling you that it's a cakewalk either, but your probability is working to your advantage as an exhibitor and or owner.
Mm-hmm. Yes, dollars and odds. The odds based on that bar chart were great. I know you also put together aged event, the cut lines and high scores based on those age events. So cut lines being what score made it back for the finals, as well as the high score in that class as well.
I do. And this is an interesting piece. Yes, we put together, again, looking at the same events. This is this year. So in 2024, and of course, we know that we've got at least 9, and it appears we might have 10, because I just saw the press release on 100X, and the Southern Florida group is going to have a new event late October in Tampa, Florida, at the Tampa ground, which is a phenomenal venue. So this is the Cactus Derby Run for the Million qualifier, the NRBC and the 100X stakes. This shows you the cut line to make finals or purse. They look at it the same way. And then it shows you the high score to win it. So this is what it's really representing, is where is the depth of our industry right now across the open. So this looks from level 1 to level 4, and Jody and I have talked about, Jody's got some phenomenal ideas on leveling, that whole process in our sport. How do we handicap, and how do we level the growth line of the feeder valve as they're coming up the ladder? I've been a huge one. There is not a big difference between level 3 and level 4. And so I'm not trying to create hate mail, but well, there just isn't. And it's more about individual situations than it is about horsepower, competition, all that kind of stuff. And so if it's working, it's working. God bless them all. This shows you. And so traditionally, now, if you go back 20 and 30 years, we didn't have 4 levels. There was 2. And before that, there was 1. It was called the Open. Then came the Limited Open. Then they created the Intermediate Open. So we had 3, and that all got turned into 4 levels. Fine. If you looked at the historical numbers of making finals in an open-aged event, these cut lines are not that far off from historical. But what you're going to start to see is the depth and the volume on who makes the finals. So finding the winner is harder. Making the purse payout is way harder than it's ever been. And that's what this shows you, because your high winning scores, if you just call it 225 to 230, that's where we are as an industry. And that's what's going on. And even at level 1, you're at 220. So that's what it's telling you. Historically, to make a finals or purse is pretty close to history. Winning it's a different story. It's now tougher, deeper, and there's more. There are more probabilities to win it than ever before.
I agree. And like I said, I'm, it kind of goes along with this. And I don't want to beat this horse to death, but like I said, and to get repetitive, we've talked about this before, but I mean, I had in my wildest dreams, I would not have been able to tell you that the industry was going to be where it's at today. If you'd asked me even 20 years ago, I'm out of sync that way. I mean, to me, and, when we talk a little bit about, these big shows, I am, from a guy who's did this for a living for a really long time and got to retire and look at it from the outside, I am amazed at the amount of disposable income that's available right now, because this is not, it's not a cheap sport that we have here, right? I mean, this deal, these things are paying a great deal of money, but from a client base, it's way beyond what I ever thought that it could be.
I agree. And that sentiment's been shared many times. I actually heard it in some of the sessions that the 100X had. And so you're 100% correct. And could anybody see it coming? No. The fact that we're here, I think, is really cool. I think the bigger question is it sustainable? Right. And what does tomorrow look like? And I hope, for everybody's sake, that it's more than sustainable and it does nothing but keep growing. That's my hope and wish. The beauty to that, the American Horse Council says there's over 30 million households that have a horse interest. Well, and I don't think that's probably an extremely conservative number, because if you look at horse racing, the Kentucky Derby is the second most watched sports event in America. That's true. Second to the Super Bowl. Well, it takes less than a minute to run it, but they create a product that, is now encumbering 4 hours of your attention and all the rest of that stuff. Right. So I see that as huge. And I'm not trying to compare our skill and stuff to racing, because it's a very different kind of sport. But do we have something that you could continue to go with? And can you create the economic business models that brings in a fan and an audience? And then you can have all the other different opportunities, those race horses that get syndicated. Seize the Gray horse, the whole conversation around Seize the Gray that just won the Preakness, that D. Wayne Lucas wins, 88-year-old horse trainer. Great. I know you know him well. But the point of the story is, one of the stories behind Seize the Gray is he's one of those that's got 200 owners.
Right.
Everybody puts in $100 or whatever, and
right.
Plays the horse game. Could we be doing some of that stuff? I think yes.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's tons of room. It just takes a little bit sometimes of outside the box thinking, and we've got some people that are doing a good job of that. 100X for sure. So it's those are things that help, and it I think that to make the industry continue to grow, that's something that again, we sometimes, I've seen people in the past since I'm a second generation guy doing this, and that a lot of guys took it for granted that it's always going to be this way, right? And so they didn't work to continue to make it better, and all of a sudden, down she came. So anyway, interesting stuff.
I was actually going to take us somewhere else. So if you want to keep us on that, I have some questions about you guys' thoughts on some of the NRBC's format this year.
Well, we'll get to that in a second because we're about halfway through the year, but we are nowhere near halfway through the aged event season. We know we've got at least 9, probably 10 more to go as far as top of the top and 5 judge systems. We know that. And with the new 100X and what they're going to do in Tampa in late fall, I think that's phenomenal. I can't wait to see what that aged event looks like. One of the big questions, and I hear this all the time, and I find this a blessing, and I chuckle every time I hear it, is that we have too many events, and if we're an exhibitor or a trainer or whatever, we have to choose where to go. I see that as a great thing, and the exhibitors see that as a bad thing because they want it all, I guess. But unlike if you take any other professional sport, I'll give you the PGA Tour. We use that a lot as a comparable analogy. Those guys if you have a PGA Tour card, you have the luxury of picking what tours you enter, what ones you go to, what your schedule looks like, what you need, what you don't need. That's nothing but good stuff. We are only at the very beginning of flirting with that. And so my 20 cents on that subject is take a breath, count your blessings, say thank you, and make a choice.
Absolutely. And I'll go even one step further than that. And maybe that 80-20 rule, but that 20% of these guys ain't missing any of them because I know some, and that trailer goes from one to the other. I mean, they get on an airplane and go show horses.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not picking and choosing. They're going where the money's at. We're going. So.
Yeah, which is about having horses to
Sure.
select from because you could have 2 trailers going different ways, jump on the airplane, do your stuff.
Yeah.
When I really enjoy those conversations with, industry friends and trainers and non-pros and all the things, production friends. Sometimes, I heard this a few weeks ago, and what was said to me from a trainer was, I'm having a hard time figuring out which one to go to. And I know you guys have heard me say this before, so I won't tell the story of where it comes from, but the problem is almost in the question, right? Because the problem is you have a hard time of figuring out which one to go to. And the point there being that you're currently living in a business model based on how the industry's operated for 20 years, right? Maybe it's time to rethink how we hire assistant trainers and put them on different strands of horses and send them, to that show. You don't maybe need to go to every single one. And so I do think I know that's hard to exist in today because we're, trying to make a living and you're trying to make the dollars and cents make sense for the client and the horse that's in training and all that stuff. But maybe if we looked at, man, should I be running my business differently? Should I be taking or not taking horses based on different criteria, based on now these new shows that are here? There might be a more of a market for some of our trainers and barns than they might even realize. So it's think about.
I agree.
So we saw at the NRBC this year that they did not announce scores, the go-rounds. Do you guys have a take on that?
They tried a couple different things. One of them was that they did not announce or display the scores during the go-round. Took them 3 days. I give them a lot of credit because they had 250 horses, about 10 more than they had last year, and they split that go-round across 3 days instead of 2, which I think the officials in the go-round, by the numbers, it went exceptionally well. Extremely consistent, very well done. They got it sorted. The draw had no influence on marks. And so that was very interesting. And I don't know this. I just heard it. I heard it through the barn talk that the reason they did that was to keep that info away from the judges so the judges don't play the gotta be in the zone game. It's a normal reflex for judges when you're in a multi-judge scenario to compare yourself against what your other colleagues are doing. It's normal. Does that make us shift? Yes, at times. It's a skill to make yourself not. So all of that is in our industry, in our system. It's not a good or a bad. It's just, it exists. Now, when they went to the finals, they came back to the original process. So yes, they tried some different things. I would tell you by the numbers, the go-round was officiated extremely well. The draw had zero influence. They got their finals to the finals now, and then I would say they struggled in the finals. So the finals were very deep. They were very tough, and by the officials, they did not all see it the same. So, and I've got a piece that I can show that and compare it when you look at the 100X. Now, is that a piece that 4-year-old to 7-year-olds? Could be. So, are there other variables that are going to come into play? Of course. But what I've been hounding on here for a couple of years is that as an industry, our officials are not performing when we need them to at their peak, which is in the finals. So they're doing really great through the go-rounds. And then they kind of hit a softer plateau for the finals. The numbers say that. So could we be doing something better to make that better? Because we're expecting our horses to peak, our horses and exhibitors to peak for the finals. And the numbers say, if you look at the cut lines and look at the high scores, that's what they're doing. They're coming back with more. So I think the challenge is we've got to meet that challenge. That's just my 20 cents.
For sure. Well, and I think, I'll just briefly touch on it. I guess I can understand why they maybe didn't want the scores announced. And I've seen some spots where, you have a judge that maybe hasn't done a major event before. It's the first one, and they're a little bit worried if they're not maybe in that ballpark, or if they have a flyer. Heck, I've done it myself a lot of times. Horse will walk out of the ring. I go, well, I'm pretty low on that one. I mean, maybe I wonder what they saw that I didn't see, and or vice versa. But good officials, that's over the heartbeat. And as far as keeping the scores from each other, it's like it'll last only as long as the drag break, because when they go into the judges' room and say, hey, what'd you mark that one? Right? I mean, it's like, yeah. I would think that any official that was really bothered by that probably shouldn't be in that spot anyway. So I don't see it as a sheet. Something new and something different. Yeah, but if it made the go round good, heck, do it. But like I said, from an official standpoint, wouldn't bother me one bit, whether or not I got to see my score and everybody else's or not.
I was very curious to hear you guys' take as officials, if the officiating piece was the intention, because to me, not that anyone's asking my opinion, but from a production perspective, to not announce the score seemed like anti-sport, right? It's like, man, we're here to compete, and we're competing against a standard. And I wasn't there. I didn't announce the event. So this is just thinking about how that might feel. I was like, man, that feels, what am I there for, right? Do you even need an announcer at that point, right? So I was just curious.
Well, let me show you, just for everybody. I've got 2 of them, and I know this will look a little busy, but this is the finals scorecards of the NRBC Level 4 finals. And the point to this is, so it's all 30 finalists from top to bottom, and that's why it's busy, because it's a lot to fit into one screen. But here's the point. You can look across 5 scorecards, and the magenta kind of color, the beige color, the white section is all the scorecards. The green is the final. So drop high and low, your final score. And then the right graph shows you score spread and ranks it, which is okay. The key to this is looking at where those pink highlight boxes are, because every one of those judges, that was their winner. And the point to this was downright amazing, and Casey Deary wins the NRBC for the 2nd year in a row. How does he do it? 2 of the 5 judges see him as the best. That's the clarity. The all 5 of them saw that finals different. Does that make sense? And so now what's interesting, now I don't have the rest. And do I think the judges try really hard and do a phenomenal job? Yes, all day. So I'm not questioning that. This is about how do we help them with the challenge, which is the depth and volume of where our sport is. Because if you look at the scorecards, now this one is the 100X finals. 25 horses in the finals, only 5 horse difference. And Brian Bell and Crystallized Whiskey win it. But if you look at this, all 5 say the same thing. Hands down, it's a unanimous. If they were a jury, this is a unanimous. If the other one was, they were a hung jury because they didn't see it the same. So, and all this shows you is that one judge had 3 horses tied at the high score. That you had one judge had 3 horses tied, one judge had 2 horses tied. The other 3 judges clearly have Brian Bell and Crystallized Whiskey winning it. All 5 of them have them up there. And that's the difference when you look at the entire batch, because what we created with our officiating system was truly an accountable function, which I give us so much credit for, and I've enjoyed it my entire lifetime. It's just a challenge of where we are and as a sport. And where we are is once you get the best of the best to the top, now it's hard. And it's hard. And they all know it. That's where we are. And I think we got to do some things to help them go through that hardness and make very finite, hard decisions. And it can be done. It's not competence at all. Make sense?
Absolutely.
So it's interesting stuff.
It is. It is.
So I got one other piece that I wanted to share just so that we stayed consistent, because those are the finals of those 2 age events. But when you look at 100X and the 4-year-olds, we've got 2 pieces here. One is this is showing you, this is using the scale. So what this shows you is the 100X event. All 4-year-olds go around and all level 4 finals. So this is only the level 4 finals in the green box. This shows you the officials marking. And if you compare this to the stat scale from last year, we're running in the same ballgame. There's not like new news, the bulk of this. And so the orange box is the go around. The green boxes is the level 4 finals, which is those 25 horses I just showed you. And you're at 3% in the finals are marking 1.5. And so that's them using the score. The difference, and this is true because the numbers say it, is the competition stepping up for the finals. Yes, and the numbers say that. And so that's the rest of the equation. So we've got to bring in the rest of the resources so our competition and our product can continue to entertain, engage, and educate a great consumer that loves what we're doing. Any questions?
No, I mean, that's a great stat sheet right there. And you're absolutely correct. I mean, there's no such thing as an easy reining anymore, right? I mean, it's like they're all, get deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think that, like I said, there's some ways, and, we've talked about it so very many times, but there are some ways to help the officiating and do a better job of separating. And I think that the fan base, if we could create that on a big level, like I said, like golf, or get those outside sponsors in instead of pretty much, kind of, well, I talk about this many times in the past too, and I don't want to get too repetitive, but, we're still in pretty much kind of a giant jackpot. We still run a lot at our own money. So if it's not stallion owners or the full enrollment fees or whatever. So, but if we ever can get to that point where we can get those outside whatever, like a golf or major league sponsorship, then there's truly no limit to this, and the officiating can rise with it. So anyway, that's good stuff.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And you're right. And that's my question about sustainability, because the fact that it's fundamentally an economic jackpot, it's self-perpetuating. There's a good side and a bad side to that. And our next step as a sport to truly advance, I think, is we're at that horizon. So it's going to be interesting to see. So I have one more. What?
Yep.
Go ahead.
No.
Well, I got another graph that I wanted to show you from 100X, because this directly goes to penalty application, which ties back into the national stats from 2023. So using 100X event, again, the tan box is the go around and the green box is the level 4 finals. But this shows you all penalties applied and then unanimous penalties and non-unanimous penalties. And all this does is this is following in line with the national trend. Not new news, pretty close. You got, consistency, penalty application in the sport of reining. Is that a factual function? No. Is there a trend? We're not sure yet. Could that be at the top end of the sport? Maybe, but we're nowhere near being able to say that yet. They just either happen or they don't happen. The interesting fact is the difference between when penalties are unanimous, meaning all judges call it, which is major penalties versus minor penalties. And in my head, those are two bad terms because penalties are all bad and they're all major in my head. So that's just me. But the fact that our sport plays this way, you're still talking about over half the penalties are not all unanimous. That's a big deal. Is it making a difference in making cut lines and making payouts? Yes, it is.
Thinking about the fact that you see that many non-unanimous penalties in the finals, you take one like the Cowtown Stakes with only 25 in the finals and every single one gets a paycheck. The fact that not all penalties were unanimous, if they had been unanimous, would absolutely make a difference as to how much money somebody is getting. So yeah, it definitely matters.
Yes, and it'll make a difference before you and after you too, because that's true.
Which Jody would go into your 80-20 or
exactly
what might be not
Yep.
80-20. Yeah.
for sure. So yeah, like I said, the penalties. There's some ways to help that situation too. But right now, it's a fact that it's making a difference. So they're not absolutes.
Have any feeling on, and I don't know if I'm even asking this question in the appropriate manner, but knowing that last year the majority of maneuvers in these aged events were marked between -half and +half, and then analyzing the Cowtown Stakes and saying that this following suit, and obviously the penalties as well. Can you say whether that's because that's what the judges are being trained to do and being trained to mark, or is that because of a lack of tools, or is that both? Shiloh's got an opinion too.
Right. Well, I think I have one, and I don't have an answer for that either. I mean, I don't. But a little bit. I think probably it could be a little bit of both. I think certainly from the tool standpoint, there's definitely some room for improvement, and I don't know from the teaching standpoint. I mean, because I haven't been involved in that in a long, long time. But I think that judges have different personalities, right? I mean, all of us we think differently, and we even sometimes we sit and we come to those chairs. Brian, you and I know each other and have done so much work together. I know what I'm going to mark. You know what I'm going to mark or a maneuver, from an evaluation standpoint. But sometimes on those teams you get together, you get some guys that have done it for a really long time and they got a pretty strong opinion and they're not going to change it. So I mean, it's just that's part of it, and I think that's part of the reason that the high and lows are kicked out, and they average or add the three, the middle three. But there's no clear. I don't have a clear answer for that. Brian, do you?
I don't. I have a theory, and I agree with you. And you're right. If you and I, and or a few others that we judge with many times, Chelsea, I think the answer to that equation is one, frequency of officiating. That's one of the single biggest ones. And I'll tell you another one that I used to think differently, and I am wrong, and I think Jody is right. And the point is, when you put officials together as a team and work with them longer as a team, you can get more accomplished, and you can have that team reach a higher level of performance. And he was always on that camp, and I was always on a skeptical. I didn't agree with him. I now do agree with him. So I think that that's a piece. And so, do we need to wait 30 years for 10 or 20 judges to get that good and get that comfortable? No. Can you do that in a different format in today's time? So I think frequency, and I think team, and I think management. Those are the big ones that will drive the officiating up to the challenge of what the competitors are bringing to us. And I don't think the competitors are it's not going to slow down if the money stays there. I'm talking about the depth of quality, because the precision and their ability to not only athletes of the horse are phenomenal. We didn't have them 30 years ago. I mean, their form to function, their mind, their heart, the modern nutrition, medicine, all the biomechanics, all the security, the mobility. We fly horses now. I know they've been flying for a long time, but it's normal now. All of those things have changed. And so it's the officiating that's got to come with it. That's all. So that's where it is.
I know I'm
That's what I
taking us
think.
backwards just a hair, but in your very first graph, you mentioned that in last year across your analytics, there were 60 judges. Do you guys have any feeling on thinking about the team concept and working as a team and being trained as a team and being mentored as a team? Is 60 where we need to be? Is it too big? Is it too small?
Well, that's my answer would be it's too many. It's too many and too diverse. Are those 60 doing all the major events across the year? The answer is no. And so that's where Jody's theory was always getting them together as a team. And that's true, but you're talking about 7 to 10 days. What if you took a team across 6 months or 12 months? And I believe Jody's right on that one, because if you could work with them and have them prepped, are they going to be perfect? No. Can they hit excellence? Yes. And can they hit excellence at a high level of frequency? Yes. We just haven't seen it yet. So I think we have too many, and they're not doing them enough at the top end. That's my theory.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Jody,
I mean, I know, like I said, I think that team concept, like I said, we've said this again. You look at the National Football League officiating, those guys are in teams, they work together all the time. And, and then the best of the best get to go to, do the playoffs and the Super Bowls. And those guys, they work with each other because they're the best of the best. So they're very comfortable with each other. They know what's going to happen. They work with the officiating crews in the trucks. They know, it's just I think that in professional sports, those guys are, they're just not randomly picked by the week. Those guys are,
Right.
they recognize the value of the team concept in officiating. So.
Right. But you also, and I agree with you, and all professional sports has that, but they also have the clear division between all of it. And we're as a sport, we're not there yet.
Right.
We still have a mix. Everybody's trying to do all of it. So, if the economics keep coming, can we make chronological steps that we're going to be an official, we're going to be a trainer, we're going to be an exhibitor, we're going to be whatever that is there room for, we've seen spots of phenomenal team coaching on the competitive side. Guy and Gaetan Gauthier, you see Fred and Danny Tremblay, and it's that kind of team in the business side of competition that does phenomenal stuff. And so Sean Flaherty and his dad, Bill, those are all examples of that type of team and what it can accomplish over long hauls. And I think that's Jody's point. And it took me a while to come around to his view on that. But anyways, I was wrong.
That was not the intended theme of today's podcast, but
I don't think the wrong is just, and I will say this. I think both of us have being able to step away from it and not be involved in needing the competitive part of the reining or the officiating part of the reining, either because not my checkbook nor my ego tells me I don't have to do that anymore. I can still buy groceries. But what it's done is it's given me a huge set of fresh eyes, looking at this from the outside where I used to be in the inside, even chairing the judges committee, even, serving on the NRHA board. It's, you're self-serving. You want there's conflicts like crazy, and getting it back here and looking at it from the outside, it's like, boy, if I had that to do over again, I would change some things, like we talked about the Andy Mo deal, boy, would I do some different stuff. And I'm saying in it, if you're officiating for a living, there's a lot of people that judge because they, that's the secondary important income to them. not just in the reining, but in, AQHA, whatever. And, the training, it's the same way. You obviously you want to put food on the table. So you do what you have to do. But if you are involved in the inside of that thing, it sometimes it's very hard to see clearly without conflict. So anyway, stepping back and being able to step back and away from it and look at it from here, different picture.
Jody, at the 100X stakes, they took some of their go-round judges and used some of them in the finals, but brought some in that were fresh and hadn't judged at that show yet. Would you talk about your perspective on where that fits into the team concept of things? Does that throw a wrench into the team piece, or is bringing that fresh perspective helpful for the team?
First of all, team-wise, I like to put the team together. I'd like them to stay together. And like I said, it's an opinion. It's not a rule of thumb. Those guys did a fine job on it. Absolutely. But I think that, back in the day, the fraternity judges, they used to put what they considered the best 5 guys, the guys that performed the best over, the fraternity, the length of the fraternity, no matter what, they would throw them together and have them judge the finals. I think that the officials could be a little more comfortable, and if they are properly managed from the standpoint of the monitor, that if you start with a team, you should be able to finish with a team, and those guys should be able to serve at a very, very high level. So I would rather my team, if I were monitoring that team and I had some issues with it, we would get through that before before we moved something. If I had some troubles, we would fix that outside of that show pen, and we would be doing the classroom work to get the team where they needed to be. But I'm opposed to bringing in fresh eyes after guys have worked together for 4 or 5 days, and then you bring a couple more into the team concept. I think that I think my accuracy would be better with my guys that have worked together for a longer period of time. My opinion.
It's a great question, Chelsea. And what I can tell you from my own experience, and Jody very well could be right. And accuracy is ultimately the end goal, because the fine distinction, the purse distribution, is what the goal of the sport is all about. The interesting piece is the freshness. How many times? Here's the question. This is literally $1 million question. How many times in the same event can the team see the same horses and be accurate with it? I'm going to use a phrase, and not everybody's going to understand it, but John Snoblin used to talk about, it's called Paris in the Rain. And the point of the story is that, because I can tell you myself, when I did the fraternity, and you'd see the same horse and rider 3 times before the finals, that was some of the hardest finals to do, because you already have a predetermined expectation. The last time I did it, and I did the finals, and I only saw those horses once before that in that particular event, I felt for myself, my finals work was far superior, because I didn't even have to deal with the expectation. I couldn't remember. Does that make sense? So I think Jody's 100% on it. It's really about that management, but I do believe that there's a freshness factor, and I don't think 2 is an issue. So a go around in the finals is not a big to do. But as our events may be getting bigger, and I went back, because in the fraternity days, we had 2 go rounds in the finals. Now you got to go rounds, semifinals and finals, but they aren't doing that with the same batch. So those batches of judges are really only seeing a horse maybe twice in that whole event, as opposed to 3 times. There's just stuff there.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Very interesting. And maybe the answer is in some combination of them, right? Teams that have been working together for some longer period of time, but may also be fresh for that event or for that set of finals. So,
sure.
Yes, I think both those factors go into it, which is managing it. And that's what Jody talks about.
Right. It is always, I hate to say this, but it's always about money. And you know what I mean? Sometimes it's difficult to, one of the biggest complaints I heard, when I'm monitored that first run for $1 million, is the guys that came in to judge that run for $1 million. So how we can't make any money, because it was one day. Right. And, so I mean, it's, and really, if somebody's coming in to judge a major event that's going to pay $500,000, Those guys ought to be able to make enough money, sit in a chair to judge that thing to make it worth their while. Well, I mean, but that's part of it too. It's hard, shows are owned and they're not managed to lose money, right? I mean, they're managed to make money. And, they have to do that through sponsorship, and they have to do that through stalls, and they have to do it through paid warm-ups, and whatever the case may be, they have to make money. I mean, or they're not going to have them. So, and it's difficult the more you lean on somebody to say, hey, you need to pay more money here. It's, they're like, yeah, it's hard. So the first, a lot of times I think the first thing that people try to do, or they did, it's certainly gotten better than it used to be, would be to cut the judges, try to make them work longer hours and or hire less and or do whatever. So, I mean, it's changing, but probably not at the rate that the same thing is in other professional sports from the officiating standpoint.
I would agree, and I think that we're past there. And you're right on event production. Do all event producers have to run net black? Yes, they do. It's the business model of how we put that all together, and the self-sustaining jackpot versus side money coming in and supporting some of that economics. That then the supply lines are paid in today's stuff and you're on a big one. So yes, all of that is completely true. And as an industry, we're at the beginning of that. But that's a long bridge, but I think we're there.
Well, I know we have still a good bit to talk about. Brian, do you want to look at, because you have score spreads from NRBC as well. We also have super slide stuff to talk about, which is super cool. And I think a lot of talking points there. Where do you want to go next?
Well, I want to bring this back. We're going to super slide. I just think it's interesting. We'll kind of wrap it up with that. So let's and just hang on because we're going to run it. This is Miriam Stillo on the super slide. This is the winning slide. Whoa, it's cool. And maybe a whole new place for our sport. I thought this was fascinating. One, they used 4 judges. They gave them a different scale. They gave them 20 tools. So they had a 1 to 10 point scale using half-point increments. They used 4 judges, summed them all together. 1 maneuver, 31 entries, paid $48,000. Miriam won $48,000 on that slide. And my first reflex was the Mexican churros, Jody, because and I know they've been over here trying to do what they do, but my first reflex was maybe this is what brings it together.
Oh,
maybe there's a whole new thing.
There's no question about that. I think and I saw this, and I called my good friend and longtime client Aldo Ron, who we've done the show with, and ask him about it. And of course, the Calas horses in Mexico slide on much lighter ground because those things will stop 60 or 70 feet. You know what I mean? It's but he felt like there are certain pedigrees that of the horses that they have certain lines that they have, and they're all bred like our U.S. Reiners are, but some of them, he said, certainly would handle that, and do a better job than others. He said he would bring his horses. He'd send horses in a heartbeat. So he said it would be great. And I said, well, all you have to do is add a little sand to your pens. I mean, it's not like you got to make a major arena change, but yeah, they're very, very good at it. I would love to see some of the Mexican horses come in and compete. The one thing that's interesting about the Calas, though, you said they're not judged on style. There's penalty application if horses pick foot up or whatever, but they're not judged. Obviously the length they all stop, forever, but there's no style points given. And here it's about style, so they would have to make an adjustment. But there's enough of South American and Latino reiners coming into the U.S. that are doing a fine job. Trust me, the Cala trainers down there can make the adjustment in about a week. I mean, they're good horsemen too. So
no, I know that, and that was my first reflex. Was maybe this could be the catalyst. I mean, can 100X keep going with a super slide and take it wherever they want? And you can get all kinds of simple ideas. Crowd was what Chelsea, you announced it, and it sounded like because they had a great crowd,
it was,
and
yes.
They were all about it, right?
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. It was. I would say was as loud as the level 4 finals. they were uniquely different in energy for many reasons that we don't have time to talk about today, but I would happily talk about at any point because I think it's cool
Sure.
for a sport. But it was super exciting, and everyone got into it.
Right. And now you're talking about, and I don't know, mares and studs and age, no, and non-pro and pro, because there was all the different riders. This is about if you have a good horse, was it worth doing it? Of course it was, because they're going to make it financially worth doing it. My reflex was immediately to the Mexican Chargers. And that bringing those two cultures of stock horsemanship together, and could you get creative with a whole nother dimension of stock horse competition? I think so. It's going to be fascinating to watch.
I think too that the thing about the thing that's super attractive about that, Chelsea just said it from the fan standpoint. That's why I've asked Aldo, I said, how in the world they get 5,000 people at a gala event sitting in there, and they got music playing, and they're, doing the Mexican thing, and they're having a blast, and they got that tequila and the beer out, and they're just having a great time. But the thing about that is the people in those stands aren't necessarily horsemen. They just, everybody can understand a horse running in and stopping, and did it like go far, and did it, keep its feet down, and then maybe add spins each way like they do. Did it spin fast? I mean, that from an outside audience standpoint is easier for them to see, to get an introduction into our sport than having them sit down and watch an entire pattern, 50 horses try to run pattern 10 and explain to them why one's better than the other. So anyway,
you can see this is Miriam right at the end of that piece, and the stands are full behind her. So, and I hear you. So anyways, it's going to be interesting to see. And, congratulations to 100X, Ranch Fuel, Miriam, all of them.
Absolutely.
So, I thought, it was super cool from a lot of perspectives, but they modified the approach to judging. We were instructed to still score and analyze the stop as it reads in the NRHA rulebook. So form to function, they were still looking for the same thing. But as you mentioned, Dad, it was on a 1 to 10 scale with half-point increments, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, so on and so forth. And they did not allow ties at first place. So if a tie happened, they had to run off, which they did.
And they
did. It happened, which I think is actually kind of cool from the standpoint of, these judges are figuring out how to use that scale brand new, right? That's new for them. That's a new skill set for them. But fundamentally, we had 31 entries in that thing that were they were plus half easy, if not plus 1.5 stops, in our traditional scoring sense. And so when you think about everything being on that top side of, that's above the 5 mark, right? And so how do you do that, and how do you separate that and all that stuff? I think that's cool. I also loved, and I don't just say this because I worked for them, but I say this because I'm a student of reining and a lover of reining. When I talked to the leadership at 100X, and I was like, okay, you guys, you're putting a lot up for this. Not only money, but the time, the preparation, the decor that they did, all the things. And they said exactly what you guys just summarized, which is that showcasing one of the most exciting parts of the pattern and then doing it over and over gives us a chance to create a fan easier than a full pat. This is what they wanted to do, is utilize one of the most beautiful parts of reining as an introduction to the rest of reining. Like, as an announcer, as a production person, I'm like, I'm in. Tell me where to go. Tell me where to be. Let's make it fun. And there were 15 things by the time I was done with the evening that I'm like, I will do this different and better next time. It was so cool. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I would take it one step, just to throw the chain in the corn picker. I would go take it one step further, just from an officials training standpoint. I would be interested to take those video clips, because this is just the mindset of an official. I don't have to do anything but just go judge this stop. And I would love to say, judge these 30 horses for me. And, go from, your traditional markings, -1.5 to +1.5. We'll see how many of those guys went and took that Miriam stop, or those stops at +1.5. Excellent. And then go find some of those horses that have that a very light stop that happened in a major event, and say, well, how come this is only a +1/2? You know what I mean? But It's the mindset. And
Mindset.
I would use that as a training tool in a heartbeat like that, because I'll
Wow.
promise you, guys at that stopping contest go, hell yeah. And when that horse comes running in and pattern 9 runs and stops, one,
Yeah.
They wouldn't say 1.5.
Yeah, if you would have backed that up, that is the first maneuver in a handful of patterns in the sport. So yeah,
Interesting. So anyway, just outside food for thought. Yeah, it's been a blast. Yeah.
Your implication there being that judges do see excellence in the full pattern and don't always award it. Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that is very, very cool idea.
Yeah.
It was fun. And they also paid out uniquely, first place, as Dad mentioned, 48,000, but they paid the same money 2nd through 5th place and the same money 6th through 10th place. Even the 10th place took home $6,000. And thinking about the odds that you guys are measuring, you had 31 horses in it. So you had a 1 in 3 shot of taking home.
Yeah.
Those are pretty good odds.
And it paid well. So yes.
For 15 seconds, 25 seconds, it was actually about 40 seconds of production time. So yeah.
Right. And
I'll promise you.
I think that's, go ahead.
No, the numbers won't drop next year. There'll be 50 in it or 75 in it or whatever. It'll be like, we're going to train for it. We're going.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to be the next challenge, right? Is, okay, you want to make something fan-friendly. Now you can't have 100 of these guys, right? And you're only talking about one maneuver. So how many before it gets boring? That's a whole nother element that we've got to figure out as a production team.
Well, could you take it? I think you could get creative, because just the run in and stop, yes, it was fast, and I'm not trying to be judgmental. Could you get creative by, putting a backup in one spin, or which is a modified piece? That's what Jody was talking about with the Charros. And that answer is yes. I think you could get extremely creative without putting it all into a pattern, which does nothing but help the riders and the horses, longevity, all that kind of stuff, and make it audience friendly. I just think the opportunities are endless. So I just wanted to kind of end us with that piece. So
Great.
Congratulations to Miriam. Congratulations to 100X and the entire staff that they've put together. They are truly changing the industry. We hope that everybody's enjoyed this show. If you got any questions, you go to cowboyoffice.com, drop us in a direct note, sign up for our email. That stuff all comes out as well. And we're off to another phenomenal year with more than half yet to come. So the data's going to be interesting. So until then, enjoy the ride.
Yes, indeed. Charles, it's been great to have you, Shiloh, help us with this one. Thank you very, very much. I look forward to seeing both of you again just as soon as possible. Everyone, thank you. Stay in the middle.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for letting Shiloh join. It was really fun not only to be a part of 100X on site, but to now have some conversation about it. So appreciate it as always. And for those of you guys that are tuning in that might not follow the Cowboy Office on socials, these guys are paying attention to every comment, every message. So make sure to stay in tune with them there and follow up and see pieces of this episode on Facebook and Instagram as well. We'll see you next time.
Today's episode is brought to you by 4D Productions in cooperation with the Consultment Agency, a full-service agency that helps bring forward-thinking equine brands into the 21st century using digital skills and services such as website development, graphic design, social media, and media production such as the podcast you're consuming here today. Thank you so much for riding along with us today. Sign up at cowboyoffice.com to be the first to know about topics affecting the industry we love so much. You can reach out to us with topics you care about by finding us on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and all podcast platforms. And remember, share this episode with someone that may enjoy it, because the more we can share our horses with others, the better our world will be.